Laplace's questionable assumption. Sylvia, a 65-year-old retired nurse, was taken ill at church one day. She was found slumped in a chair with a drooping face, weakness of her arm, and difficulty in speaking. A doctor in the congregation recognised these signs of a stroke and immediately sent for an ambulance to take Sylvia to the emergency department at the local hospital. Soon after arriving, the emergency doctors arranged for Sylvia to have a CT scan of her brain. As part of the scan, she was given an injection of X-ray dye into a vein in her arm so that the scanner could create an image of the blood flow to her brain. This image showed a large region where blood was only just flowing due to a blood clot blocking the artery to that side of the brain. With this information, doctors were able to give Sylvia an injection that dissolved the clot, and over the next few days, she regained the use of her arm and her speech improved. The technique that demonstrated the blood flow to Sylvia's brain was first performed in the 1990s by a group of researchers I led at Cambridge, in the UK. The blood flow was calculated using this equation. Equations like this can be scary for many people, but this was the simple version. It says that the rate at which X-ray dye reaches the brain is equal to the blood flow to the brain multiplied by the difference in the concentration of the dye in the blood vessels supplying and leaving the brain. This was a simplified version because we had used an assumption to make things less complex. We assumed that the brain was an instantly mixed compartment. Simplifying assumptions like this are an important part of scientific research. They allow scientists to arrive rapidly at a solution to a problem without being sidetracked by all of its details. However, simplifying assumptions are not necessarily true, and this was the case for our blood flow method. An instantly mixed compartment does not exist, and the assumption does not match reality. Once, when I was presenting our work to other scientists, I was asked why I had not allowed for mixing of the X-ray dye within the brain. Had I been quick enough, I might have borrowed the famous answer that the French mathematician and astronomer Pierre-Simon Laplace gave to Napoleon when presenting his work on the stability of the solar system. Napoleon, who liked to ask difficult questions, wanted to know why Laplace had not mentioned God in his calculations. Laplace simply replied, "I have no need of that hypothesis." Although I could have answered in this way, the assumption of instantaneous mixing would still not be true. It is just that the technique works without the concept of mixing, as shown by Sylvia's story. By excluding God from his calculations, Laplace had used a simplifying assumption just as we had done, and just like our blood flow method, the assumption does not necessarily match reality. But Laplace had good reason to take the God hypothesis seriously. His own work had demonstrated a remarkable correspondence between mathematical theory and the behaviour of the physical world, something that is hard, if not impossible, to explain with science alone, but is so much more likely if you believe the physical universe to be grounded on the rationality of God. In fact, the exclusion of all supernatural causes is a simplifying assumption that is used throughout science, but this does not mean it has to be true. Science merely operates as though there is nothing outside nature. Sylvia's difficulty in speaking during her stroke was because a blood clot had prevented blood reaching a part of the brain involved in the production of speech. This brain region is named after the French physician Pierre-Paul Broca, who first recognised its importance for language. Broca is also known for the following quote: "The least questioned assumptions are often the most questionable," and questioning underlying assumptions and seeing how different assumptions affect the interpretation of results are essential for a proper scientific assessment. When this was done for our blood flow method, it was confirmed that mixing had minimal effect. But it is equally required for what is perhaps the least questioned assumption in science, the non-existence of the supernatural. If we reinterpret scientific data without this assumption, it can often lead to a deeper understanding of the natural world and how we relate to it. The science that helped Sylvia can serve in other ways. For example, we can use the power of the scientific method to refute atheists' arguments against belief in God. We can make sense of why the universe appears to be finely tuned for the existence of life. We can gain a deeper understanding of how living organisms developed. And scientific studies of spiritual experience and practice can offer insights into how humans relate to the divine and how the brain sometimes rejects God. In short, we can begin to use science for faith.